Good afternoon. As you may have heard from questionable sources on Facebook, the government is spreading mind control chemicals to the masses by spraying them out of airplanes. This was extremely concerning to me, so I decided to look into it. And what I found was one of the most pointless conspiracy theories I've ever heard of. And I'll explain why I say that in a moment, but first, a little history. This conspiracy was born shortly after the United States Air Force released a report in 1996 regarding weather control. Now, I say regarding weather control loosely, as I would guess that's how the founders of this theory interpreted it, but after reading the actual report, it is much more focused on how could the Air Force use weather control with the key stipulation of once it has been invented. That isn't to say that there aren't modern forms of weather control, and I will discuss those later in this video, but my guess is that that's not what the founders of the theory were talking about. The story of this conspiracy is unsurprisingly full of holes. The following is a summarized version of conspiracy investigator Jay Reynolds' report detailing his interactions with the men that founded this theory, which he used to piece together its origin story. A year prior to this report, a man by the name of Bill Brumbaugh, an evangelist news host, floated the idea that the chemical ethylene dibromide was being burned in the military's new jet fuel, JP-8. He communicated his concerns to a supposed Air Force pilot by the name Rick Flores, who claimed that the refueling teams were required by law to wear full protective gear due to the new fuel. He, of course, could not supply any documentation of the aforementioned law. To add to the confusion, there are two conflicting stories of how the jet fuel was tested. In 1996, Bill Brumbaugh claimed that he obtained a sample of the JP-8 jet fuel through Flores, which he could not test himself due to financial reasons. So he sent the sample to a man named Ron Williams, who sent it to another person named Larry Wayne Harris. At the same time, Flores stated that he obtained samples of the commercial jet fuel, Jet A, not the military JP-8 fuel, and sent it to the same Larry Wayne Harris. If the plot holes in the story so far weren't enough, the background of Larry Wayne Harris makes the conspiracy even more questionable. In 1995, Harris was arrested for ordering vials of bubonic plague by stealing the letterhead of a laboratory he was doing septic tank work for. Harris had always been interested in the idea of biological warfare, starting with his microbiology degree from Ohio State University. He has written extensively about the dangers of biological warfare, writings which included a book that essentially served as a survival guide for biological attacks, all for the low price of $20. He also detailed his plan to a group, presumably the Aryan Nation, which he was a high-ranking member of, his plan to release anthrax in the New York City subway system. So, to sum him up, he was an omega racist who had a huge financial interest in the public being afraid of a biological attack. This is the man who allegedly tested the samples sent to him by either Flores or Brumbaugh. The results of this test, or these tests, the story isn't straight, apparently showed the ethylene dibromide in the sample. Now this may be something of substance if any one of the three bozos who held this supposed test could produce a copy of it. Jay Reynolds, the man who was looking into this conspiracy and communicating with the aforementioned characters to ascertain the origin story, asked the three of them independently for a copy and received the following excuses. Brumbaugh said he didn't trust Harris and threw the results out. Flores said that the results were in storage and it would be way too difficult to go get them. And a man who Harris worked with, Richard Fink, stated, "Oh, I can't produce a copy of the results. It would ruin the livelihoods of all the people that worked at that lab and would be disingenuous to the people that died trying to get this result." Bullshit. Richard Fink, by the way, was also a member of the white supremacy group, the Aryan Nation. So, in all likelihood, there never was a test. Or, if there was, it showed nothing of substance, and they knew that. In 1997, Harris and his new buddy Richard Fink started a biowar defense consulting firm to further their financial interest in this conspiracy. And they spam emailed anyone they could about the impending threat coming from the sky. Despite the supposed evidence being as weak as ever, the conspiracy was lapped up by talk show hosts and internet conspiracy boards and ignited into what we see today. Today, according to YouGov polling, a whopping 15% of Americans believe that there is, quote, a secret program for aircraft to release toxic chemicals into the atmosphere in a way that forms visible plumes in the sky, also known as chemtrails. 15%! Yes, it's a new day, my AC broke so I'm in a tank top. Anyways, back to the video. This is even more insane given that there are no major news outlets that even entertain the idea anymore, and the proponents of this theory have receded to internet forums and small-time talk shows. Nevertheless, the chemtrails community is still holding strong to their beliefs. For this next section, I'm going to bring up the individual pieces of evidence for the theory and then explain them away. The current belief acknowledges that some contrails are just condensation. Obviously, they're not stupid, but the ones that stay in the sky are the ones that are full of chemicals. This is in no way proof of chemtrails, as the length of time a contrail stays in the air is dependent on the humidity of the air it is flying through, not necessarily the composition of the plane's emissions. The three types of contrails that exist depend on the weather conditions. First, short-lived contrails, which form in drier areas of the sky with less water in the sky to form a contrail. Then there are persistent, non-spreading contrails, which form in higher humidity areas but with low turbulence, so the contrail just kind of stays there for up to 4 hours. And finally, there are persistent spreading contrails, which are the same as the non-spreading contrails, they just form in turbulent parts of the sky, so the contrail will spread out over a larger area. This also explains why there are gaps in contrails, as when a plane goes from flying in a high humidity area to a low humidity area, the contrail will temporarily stop. The next thing that proponents will usually point to is the idea that these trails didn't exist before 1995, which is also just not true. The only reason people think that it is because no one gave a f before the conspiracy. Here's a photograph of the Imperial War Museum showing contrails all the way back in 1940 during the Battle of Britain. And here are two photos from the 1963 book, A Color Guide to Clouds, detailing contrails in the same way we understand them today. Some theorists will then point you to a KSLA news broadcast showing a farmer's soil samples that apparently showed barium levels in his soil at 68 parts per million, which is 3 times the EPA's toxic level.
Bill Nichols snapped several photos of the strange clouds from his home in Stamps, Arkansas. They begin as normal contrails from a jet engine, but do not fade away like a normal contrail. Soon after, he saw particles in the air.
Because we'd see it drop to the ground in a haze.
Nichols then noticed the material collecting on the ground.
This is water and stuff that I collected in bowls. I had it set out in my backyard on my dad's pickup truck.
KSLA News 12 had the sample tested at a lab. The results? A high level of barium, 6.8 parts per million, more than 3 times the toxic level set by the EPA.
Now, the scientifically inclined among you may notice that the measurement is in micrograms per liter, which is not in fact parts per million, but parts per billion. Meaning the actual levels were well within safe territory. God, I love local news. And for the record, the original reported chemical in the jet fuel, ethylene dibromide, would have no purpose in jet fuel, as the chemical is used in fuels to prevent engine knocking, which was never a problem in jet engines. Now, my final point is probably going to hit conspiracy theorists pretty close to home. The man, the myth, the legend, Edward Snowden, who dedicated his life to exposing the secrets of the NSA and CIA, actually searched for any traces of chemtrails in the Alphabet Agency's secret files and found nothing, stating himself that, yeah, chemtrails are not a thing. To wrap things up, I want to explain why I say this conspiracy is pointless. First, there is no evidence that it even exists, and secondly, there are discussions that can be had about the potential environmental hazards associated with planes in the sky. Clouds act as an insulating layer for the Earth, which contrails contribute to, which have been proven to add to the global temperature just as clouds do. There doesn't need to be a giant conspiracy for contrails to be doing potential harm, and focusing on these elusive chemicals detracts from any productive conversation. Another element that can be discussed without there being a grand conspiracy is the idea of intentionally changing the weather. Currently, there are methods with yet to be proven effectiveness of seeding clouds to change the weather. There's no secret around it, and there is a real opportunity to discuss the potential hazards they may bring. Hopefully you learned something here, and you can go into your next Thanksgiving dinner armed and ready to go argue with your QAnon-loving relatives. And just to be clear, I am not saying to trust the government at their word, but instead that there are more productive ways to question the actions of the government that do not involve grand, unproven conspiracies. Thank you.